There are some people who claim that cultural appropriation is either not as much of a problem as people make it out to be, or that it isn't a thing at all. They say, it's not appropriation, it's appreciation. Or, my use of X, Y, or Z isn't hurting anyone. Or, why does it matter who's doing it if the culture is represented? What all three of these phrases sound like to those whose cultures are being appropriated is, I really don't care how my words and actions make you feel, even though I'm gonna pick and choose the parts of your lifestyle that best suit my persona on a particular day. Also, what the hell, Katy Perry? Now, it's important to note that she later apologized for all of this, but still, what the hell? Before we get too deep into this, we need to start with a baseline of what exactly cultural appropriation is. We can define cultural appropriation as the adoption of an element or elements of one culture or identity by members of another culture or identity. This can be controversial when members of a dominant culture appropriate from disadvantaged minority cultures. Thanks, Wikipedia. In her video, Cultural Appropriation, Who Gets a Pass?, YouTuber T Noir says this.
I view cultural appropriation as taking culture from another group, especially, but not exclusively, from a group whose culture has been scorned by the masses, and claiming it as your own and or trying to profit off of it.
Basically, cultural appropriation is the act of cherry-picking bits and pieces of minority cultures that best suit your needs for whatever you're aiming to achieve, especially for the purposes of entertainment. It's also been criticized as a form of colonialism, in that the members of the dominant culture, even when explicitly requested by members of the appropriated culture, take those bits and pieces and attempt to make them their own, thereby taking even more from the originating cultures. It actively works against the efforts of cultural preservation taken on by minority communities, and can help perpetuate harmful stereotypes that we should actively seek to erase. In a 2011 article entitled Don't Mess Up When You Dress Up, Cultural Appropriation and Costumes, author Kirsten Johnson writes that cultural appropriation, quote, is also an act of appropriation in which someone who does not experience that oppression is able to play, temporarily, an exotic other, without experiencing any of the daily discriminations faced by other cultures. Turning other cultures into costumes, especially around Halloween, when things like Malia, the slur for Indigenous Alaska woman, the slur for Romani woman, princess, and adult voodoo magic costume are all sold at Spirit Halloween stores, doesn't convey that you want to understand the culture that you're representing. Rather, that you're trying to use it for your own personal gain in some shape, form, or fashion. Link to contact Spirit Halloween stores to stop selling these racist costumes is in the description below. The same can be said of the fashion industry, with one of the most egregious examples being Victoria's Secret. Numerous times. 2012 saw model Karlie Kloss walk down the runway in a Native American headdress, turquoise jewelry, and suede fringe as she represented November in their Months of the Year themed fashion show, making light of the genocide of Indigenous people at the hands of colonizers, and of the fact that, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, Native American women are 2.5 times more likely to be sexually assaulted. Thankfully, the look didn't make it to the airwaves due to being cut from the broadcast. And in 2016, well, that was just as bad, when model Elsa Hosk, who is decidedly not of Chinese descent, wore a look that turned traditional Chinese dress into, well, this. The look not only includes the giant feather-covered dragon wrapped around Hosk's waist, but also used Chinese-inspired prints to make crop tops and thigh-high boots. Yikes. Also in 2012, the Navajo Nation took Urban Outfitters to court for their illegal use of the name Navajo, which was registered by the tribe as a trademark in 1943, for a collection that contained items like Navajo hipster panties and a Navajo print flask. Of course, this wasn't the first time that Urban Outfitters has used minority cultures for financial gain. They've received pushback for items like Palestinian-style kifyas, or as they called them, anti-war woven scarves, and a duvet cover featuring the Hindu god Ganesh. And in 2018, the Dior Cruise 2019 collection featured actress Jennifer Lawrence wearing the brand's fashion inspired by escaramuzas, or traditional, highly skilled Mexican horsewomen, and by characters written by Chilean author Isabel Allende in her novel The House of the Spirits. And, well, the campaign for the collection included absolutely zero representation of Mexican women, especially those who still participate in escaramuza today. Lawrence said in a video about the collection, quote, "One of the main inspirations for this collection is the traditional women riders of Mexico, so I'm really excited that this collection is looking at and celebrating these women's heritage through such a modern lens." Celebrating is not the right word there, Jennifer. Stealing, maybe. The fashion world isn't the only one to participate in the practice of cultural appropriation and the transformation of traditional cultural icons into caricatures. The world of sports features some particularly appalling offenders, especially in terms of Native American culture. We're all aware of baseball teams from Atlanta and Cleveland, as well as the football teams from Kansas City and Washington, D.C., although that particular team has changed its name after receiving backlash for being a very outdated and racist term for Native Americans. But what do we know about the team's traditions? Well, for one, the Kansas City football team took its name from the nickname of Harold Roe Bartle, a man who is distinctly not Native American, who founded the tribe of Mickasay in 1925 as part of the Boy Scouts of America program, whose traditions are yet another example of cultural appropriation. According to a CNN article written by Aliyah Asmalash just before the Super Bowl this year, Bartle claimed to have been, quote, inducted into a local tribute of the Arapaho people, and went by Chief Lone Bear within the Mickasay organization. After becoming the mayor of Kansas City, Bartle began being called Chief, and when he convinced the owner of the Dallas Texans to bring the team to Kansas City, the team and Bartle ended up with the same nickname. Despite the supposed history behind the name, the practices of the team, including its mascot known as War Paint, which was originally ridden by a white man in a headdress, fans in attendance painting their faces to resemble Native Americans and doing the tomahawk chop, and the banging of what can only be described as a war drum, are what really have come under fire, especially in the wake of Kansas City winning the Super Bowl. The baseball team in Cleveland is by far the most culturally appropriative use of Native American imagery in the entirety of Major League Baseball. When Cleveland adopted its mascot, Chief Wahoo, in 1947, it began a downward trend of racism and appropriation with the team and its fans. In Bigot Katz's 2018 article for Smithsonian Magazine, Paul Chott Smith, who is an associate curator at the National Museum of the American Indian, and, as the article notes, a self-professed baseball fan, says, quote, "It's an outrageous racist caricature. And what's worse is that in the city of Cleveland in northern Ohio, it's really the only visible representation you see of Native Americans. That's where it becomes this very insidious phenomenon that puts Indians completely in the past as a caricature." During the 2016 World Series, fans showed up to Progressive Field in the typical red face paint and traditional headdresses, and the Cleveland American Indian movement called for a protest against the logo mid-series. Chief Wahoo's predecessor can be traced back to 1932, when artist Fred George Reinert drew him as a caricature, with shaded skin and a pointed nose. Soon after its inception, the character began to be known as the Little Indian, and was used in the Cleveland Plain Dealers coverage of the baseball team. Reinert used a number of iterations of the Little Indian in his drawings for about 30 years. Walter Goldbach, a then 17-year-old draftsman, created the first official logo of Chief Wahoo in 1946, and the team began featuring him on their uniforms in 1947. Cleveland's owners and managers fought the idea of retiring Chief Wahoo until 2018, when it was announced that the logo would no longer include the racist caricature on their uniforms, banners, or merchandise sold on the MLB website. They did not, however, remove said racist caricature from the merchandise sold at local souvenir shops and retail locations. In a 2018 Vox article written by Julie Bogan, a Native American activist named Sundance, who is also the director for the aforementioned Cleveland American Indian Movement, said, "The red face is problematic. The fact that it is an Indian head is problematic because an Indian head is a symbol of genocide, and Wahoo as a caricature then mocks mass murder. The red feather in his hair is a spiritual symbol of a lot of different Native people in this country, so they've appropriated spirituality, and they are perpetuating a symbol of genocide." Perhaps the most prominent cases of cultural appropriation happen in the music industry. While we made mention of Katy Perry earlier on, we haven't quite gotten into the utter malarkey that happens when artists decide to use their privilege to select sections of minority culture that will end up earning them the most success. We can usually spot cultural appropriation fairly easily in the music industry. Artists like Miley Cyrus get big boosts in their career from sparking controversy over things like twerking, wearing traditionally black hairstyles, and using AAVE, or African American Vernacular English. And, especially in Miley's case, these artists typically shed the persona they've cultivated in favor of something a bit more societally friendly after they've achieved their goals. Thankfully, Miley received rightful backlash for her actions, and has since been called out as a culture vulture. There's also artists like Gwen Stefani who have made their entire careers out of cultural appropriation. Gwen, an American of Irish and Italian descent, started off with the bindi in the Just a Girl video, the decoration applied close to her eyebrows that, in the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia, represents the opening of the third eye, making it both historically and culturally relevant to the region of Greater India. She wore that for a few years before she moved on to her 2001 collaboration with Eve for Let Me Blow Ya Mind, and her appropriation of black culture. And then it gets worse. Way worse. With the release of her 2004 album Love, Angel, Music, Baby, and the success of her single Holla Back Girl, also an exercise in the appropriation of black culture, Gwen also introduced what were known as the Harajuku Girls. Putting it nicely, the Harajuku Girls were a group of 4 Japanese backup dancers / Gwen's entourage, who were sometimes dressed in schoolgirl outfits, sometimes in baby doll outfits, and sometimes whatever fashion when Gwen felt like putting them through that day. But they always remained silent and submissive. She even objectified and practically fetishized them in the song What You Waiting For? I can't wait to go back into Japan. Get me lots of brand new fans. Osaka, Tokyo, you Harajuku girls, damn, you've got some wicked style. A 2005 Salon article by writer Mihi An says it perfectly. Quote, Stefani fawns over Harajuku style in her lyrics, but her appropriation of this subculture makes about as much sense as the Gap selling Anarchy t-shirts. She's swallowed a subversive youth culture in Japan and barfed up another image of submissive, giggling Asian women. And what makes this all even worse? Gwen will not stop this. In the video for her 2005 single Luxurious, Gwen decided to move on to Mexican culture. Oh, Gwen. Oh, sweetheart, just why? Oh, God, this one is literally the worst of them all. The Wikipedia entry for the song and the video literally says that, quote, Stefani plays a chola in high school. What? And even better, the Harajuku girls are by her side, yet again. Oh, Gwen, never change. It's important to note that cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation are not the same thing. Cultural appreciation seeks to explore, understand, and honor other people's heritage and traditions. It does not turn minority cultures into caricatures or treat them as a monolith representative of the entirety of those communities. Cultural appreciation also teaches us to educate ourselves on how we and our own culture, regardless of what it may be, have formed relationships with other cultures throughout history. Make sure you're conscientious of the impact of your words and actions when interacting with another culture, and continually adapt when you discover new information. That's a good rule of thumb anyway. Thanks for watching. Take a moment to like and subscribe, and hit that bell to get our notifications. See you next time.